Normally, we would do a warm round of applause to welcome Dr. Iruka. And since we can't do that, I would just invite you to use your reactions in Zoom if you'd like to welcome her. And I am happy to turn the screen over to Dr. Iheoma Iruka.
Good morning, everybody. I am so honored and thrilled to be with you in virtual world. Just thank you so much, Robin, for your wonderful and warm introduction, but really for your leadership in this work, the Learn to Earn Dayton, as well as Preschool Promise, and obviously as well, Veronica White, who, both of you have been such great people to know through this process, and I hope it's just the beginning and not the end. So just thank you so much for welcoming me. And yeah, you said it, so I'm gonna say yes, I have the two kids and they're literally in class with dad and their teachers and all that. So I just want to say I'm blessed to be able to have a partner and for them to have a dad, knowing that there's so many people who don't have the luxury to be able to work from home, especially our early kin education educators. So I just thank you for creating a space for me. So I would say, put your seatbelt on, and if you want to curse me out on chat, I'm okay. No, but it's but no, it's really I feel like I'm so thrilled to be with you. And I would say the last trip I almost went to right before March when we got locked down here in North Carolina was actually to a higher state. So so I was going to come to your state, but that was my last trip I had to cancel. So I hope there's another opportunity for all of us to be together, but really for you all to be together in the moment of supporting each other, but also continue to push the work forward. So thank you for allowing me to be in your space. So I'll just go right away because I want to both share with you as much as I can, and hopefully you can feel my spirit. I've been up since 2:30 in the morning. Don't even ask why, but I have been up since 2:30. And I do not drink coffee, but I need to, I think, right? So, but anyways, we'll proceed. So, I am an early childhood researcher, I'm a developmental psychologist, but I'm really a social justice researcher. Like my job, I feel, is to make sure that my work is meaningful, but my work in collaboration and coordination with many who are working directly with children and families, but also policymakers is really going to be acted on. Like I don't want to just build my CV. I want to make sure that I'm doing something for my children who look like my children, for young people. And so that's really my commitment and my passion, no matter what. So I thank you for allowing me to enter your space. But before I really jump in, I just want to make sure that I honor and acknowledge that I live and work and build my family's economic wealth really under Lumbee tribe land. I live in North Carolina in the Research Triangle Park area. And so I think it's important for us to acknowledge that many of us live on land that has been taken through colonization. And so as we kind of sort of engage together, both during this keynote, but also the whole day and moving forward, is that we begin to acknowledge the pain that is still here with both people who are indigenous to the land, but also those who were working on the land, the slave people from Africa. So I want us to really understand that those trauma is still with us and it still exists every single day. And I experience a lot of that trauma every single day of my work, but also just my day-to-day life. So I want us to continue to recognize that we are living on land and we are benefiting off the fruits and labor of many people. Especially from indigenous and particularly Black people. Robin has already given you a sense of who I am, but I do want you to know who I am, not just in terms of the academic world of, I am at UNC, I came back again in October, but I, went to school in Philly, University of Miami, Boston University. But I do want you to know that, right, I grew up in Boston, that, that's part of a lot of my experience growing up was in Boston, again, known as one of the most segregated places in the country, even though it's also viewed as progressive. How do you put that together? And I was born in the state of Texas. So say whatever, I don't know what to make of that, right? But that's part of my world. But what you don't see in this visual is that it's actually the Nigerian flag. So I am, my name is Nigerian. I am from the African diaspora. I was born here, families from here or socialized here. But I do represent what I would say is the fabric of the African diaspora, that, I have roots in Africa. I was born here, I live here. And I think that spirit of globalization is really important, especially as you think about how do you ensure that you are not biased? How do you ensure that you are really anti-racist or at least decolonizing everything that you do, particularly around with children in the most formative years? And so for me, I want to remind you that part of my world is not just academic, but it's also just my lived experience and my ability to navigate multiple worlds, which is an asset that we should measure for children, is that they have to navigate different worlds, different languages, different cultures. And I feel like I have been doing that all my life. And I credit that to my family. I credit that to my community. So what is my take home? So for those who are like, I want you to know what my take home is, because I feel like it's important so you know where I'm going to go. There's no point, this is not a movie. I don't want to sort of like wait to the last minute. I'm going to tell you what my message is. My message is that racism is part of our everyday lives, from the interactions we have, the environments that we create. Is literally the air that we breathe. Like, it's literally, we are fish in water. We just don't know we're in the water, right? And to me, engaging in anti-racism is about, we have to center children by showing protection for them, affection, high expectation, and connection, deep, authentic connection. And to me, what do we do? So we can talk about, well, okay, all these issues, fine, what do we do? We must engage in what I consider and what I will call richer actions through our self-inquiry and our collective action networks. And this is necessary in order for us to truly combat racism. Now, I'm not, look, I may look young, I'm not that young, but I know that we're not going to conquer racism today, tomorrow, next year. However, we have to work on it. It is a journey that we all have to be on, working individually, but also collectively. It's like COVID-19, right? We're trying to battle this global pandemic. The reason why it's been hard for us is because, when one person says, I'm going to wear a mask, and somebody says, I'm not going to wear one, we never get to solving it. So luckily we have a vaccine, but if we did not, we will still be in this sort of fight for, like, one person doesn't want to wear one, somebody doesn't want to wear one. And if we're not working together, we're always going to get sick. That's racism, right? I can work and try my best. You can work and try your best. But if we're not working towards the same collective vision, then, in many ways, it makes the job harder. It's like pushing that boulder up a hill. So remember, and I use the word journey, and I think that's an important word that many people use in this space, because it is, all of us are at different places. Some of us are still not even on the road. And I hope you are. If you're not on the road today, I hope you get on the road today. But that means that we have to continue to challenge ourselves. I challenge myself every single day, because I know I'm literally drinking the same water as everybody. You have to continue to read, engage, lean in, watch a Netflix video, a Prime video, I don't know, do something, right? But you also have to be held accountable. We all have to be held accountable, because doing nothing is condoning racism, right? There's no such thing as like, I'm a light racist or I'm not a racist. It's really like, you're either a racist or you're anti-racist. So you actually have to be you're action oriented. And that's why I love sort of the message in the book, really, for this conference, about the action, that you have to take action to really implement equity. So now to kind of jump into, just make sure we have kind of some of the same grounding. You probably have heard this because you guys have been doing this for 12 plus years, but I want us to make sure that we understand that racism exists at multiple levels. But on the bottom, the essence of it is that racism is the use and the creation, the organization of institutional power that you organize around white supremacy, right? But it's not just the organization of it, it's also the oppression and the brutalization and dehumanization of those who are not white based on skin color, right? We have organized all of the things that we think are important, are valuable, things to aspire to. We've organized it primarily based on skin color, which is then categorized as race. So while race is not a biological thing, it has been used as a powerful social tool to organize power and privilege. That is why racism is not about an individual. It does operate at the individual interpersonal level, like in bigotry and biases, of course. But the power of it works at the institution and systemic level, because it could just operate in of itself in many, many different ways. And I'll give you some examples. So that's just important to understand, that it's not an individual thing, it's a system thing, an institutional thing. And it exists in early childhood. And during the Q&A, you can ask me how, and I can tell you how. And then the other part I want to make sure we also know is this, people talk about biases and implicit bias. I had bias, shoot, and I own every single one of those. But we all have it. That's really the human condition. That is how the brain functions, because you have to be able to categorize information so that you can move forward. If I had to basically pay attention to every single thing my children did, I would never get any work done, right? So we have to actually be able to categorize and sort of be able to synthesize and move forward and make decisions. A teacher has to be able to categorize, process and do things in a matter of seconds. So this is it's a cognitive processing. And it's not, technically it's not under your own conscious control. And it can lead to either favorable or unfavorable. Again, this is a conditioning that happens. So why do I talk about structural racism and implicit bias? Because this is sort of that circle, this is that loop that we're in all the time. And to me, this is what we need to make sure that we begin to really deal with, especially if you're an early childhood educator, if you interface with early childhood educator and children, is that because a lot of what happens starts early. We know early childhood, we know that the most of the brain is developed by the first, few years of life. A lot of children's learning, regulation, identity, a lot of that is actually set in that first 3 years. So this is important. So bear with me for a couple minutes. So remember, the US really started, what we know as the US really started on really the attempted eradication of natives. And then it really started with the enslavement of people from Africa, right? And that's the economic engine that really created this country. And so policies and practices were then consolidated to protect power, right? That were unearned, really. So, right, it's like I'm trying to protect my power that I have through, and don't forget, enslaved people made up a big population. So to ensure that white people maintain that power, they created policies and rules. And some of those included voting rights, that's being debated today, right? Or at least this week. You had things about loans and access to financial instruments so that you can build wealth, buy land, buy a house, all that. We have things like residential segregation that happened with redlining. I grew up in Boston. They had a big version of that. Access to education, green space, et cetera, and even jobs and hiring. So we had policies that specifically ensured that certain groups of people would never access those tools to give them power and privilege and economic wealth. Because that happened, that actually created the racial disparities we see in economics, in health, in education, in every single thing we have, prison, et cetera, right? And because you create those disparities that said that, oh, for example, Black people are not smart, they're poor, they're lazy, all these disparities were created. It then creates this bias, this narrative, right? That a group of people are less than, are not smart, don't make money, are broke. All these things were then primed, right? That's the bias that has been created, that I created racial disparities. I create these sort of things to happen. And then I show through different ways of education, media, whatever, I then associate skin color with less than, with that dehumanization part. And then I create policies that reaffirm that, right? That reaffirm that whole entire notion. And so we're really in this cycle of where the policies create the disparities then create the narrative about certain groups of people, and then the policies continue to sort of operate in that cycle. And this is where we have to sort of say, how do we break the policies from the disparities that we see, and then from the priming and association that we continue to see, and then the policies that continue to sort of re-engineer that kind of circle. So we have to disrupt this. We have to create policies that disrupt this. We have to ensure that the disparities aren't happening. And then we have to work on ourselves about making sure that we're not following the dominant narrative about certain groups of people. This is the hard part, because we are primed every day. Turn on the news, whose face is on there when we talk about crime. Turn on the news, who's there about poverty. So there's all this association that we have been fed since the moment we were born. And trying to undo that takes a lot of work. And this is really important. So I really appreciated getting the report, because I think part of, the report from Learn to Earn Dayton, because I felt like while they showed some of the disparities, right, there was still language about, this is not about children, right? Yes, we're talking about children, but we also have to remember they did not cause this. This is an adult and a systems problem that has been with us. And what we're trying to do is to address it by providing the best opportunities and the best experiences to mitigate these systemic inequities that is inherent, not their fault. But we have to figure out how do we continue to fix it and put them on the path to continue to be successful over time. But how do we also ensure that we're not minimizing their assets and the culture they bring to us? I really appreciate Robin's articulation that the gap has always been with us, but we also have to begin to expand our mind about what do children know that we are not capturing, especially Black children, who have been throughout the legacy of racism, is always positioned as less than, as inhuman, as not smart, as not bringing anything to the table. But we know that is not the case, right? Like the Black violin, that brilliance, that Black brilliance, it doesn't just come, it's not an exception. They're not an exception to the rule. That is what exists in many Black people and Black children, but we have to recognize that. And we also have to provide the opportunity for that to be, right? Those guys grew up in Fort Lauderdale. And if you know about South Florida, like I do, because I went to Miami and my husband's from there, right? There's certain things that, inequities that exist, particularly for Black people. And so this is the important part of, we have to disrupt the cycle. I stayed here long, but I stayed here long because I think we need to understand the connection between not just policies, but also our behavior and the importance of us having to check ourselves, right? Don't tell a child, oh, you are not this, you're not that, but check ourselves in terms of our attitudes and then what we do because of our attitudes. So now I think that we have to really push, like before we were talking about equity and all this, and I think it's important, equity is important, but I think we have to push on the issue of anti-racism, right? And I know some people are gonna be like, oh my God, Iheoma, no. But we have to, because we have waited too long to really meet the needs of some groups of children, particularly Black children, after centuries of brutalizing the community, of not seeing the best of them. So we have to create a shared vision, principles, and mindset. So I won't belabor what equity is, but I do want to make sure we have the same language, right? So equity really is about everyone has a fair and just opportunity to thrive, right? That is the notion of equity, but it's also that we remove any obstacle in the way, right? So if I'm a child who speaks a different language, I need to be provided with the opportunity to also thrive like a child who speaks English, if that's the dominant language. And that means that I have to now give them the support that they need to be able to thrive. And the obstacle may be their language, but that's also an asset that we can use to ensure that they thrive. Now, when we talk about racial equity, like the same definition, right? Everyone has a fair and just opportunity to thrive and reach their potential, regardless of their race and skin color. The problem is that I can't erase my race, right? I can't erase that part or my skin color, right? But what could we do is begin to challenge the notion of how skin color and race it limits your experiences, limits your opportunities, and then eventually limits your outcomes. We have to figure out this part, right? I know there's other socio-demographic factors like language, like ability, like gender, LGBTQ, what geography, rural, urban, suburban, wherever you live. I know that there's those other inequities that exist, but I would challenge all of us to say, if you don't put race at the top and don't examine that intersectionality lens, then once you put race, once you put anything of race, put a black child who's Black with disability, put a Black family who live in rural parts of Ohio. Their life is different than somebody who is white and living in rural part. If you're white and disability. So to me, if you look at the intersectionality issue of disability and race or race and income, we know that those things matter. So I think we can't all just say, well, we have to do equity for everybody. Sure. But if you do not fix or address the big elephant in the room, which is race and racism, then to me, all we're doing is basically just hiding our head in the sand and saying, oh, I hope it goes away. And it doesn't. And every single year we see the outcomes of it. We see the brutality of it. 2020, if you were not awake, we saw the brutal murdering of Black people. And last time I looked, nobody has actually gone to jail for that, right? And to me, that is the continual harm and trauma that we continue to see visited, particularly on Black people. And that also means that children are getting the message about the vulnerability of their own lives. And this is important for those who are early child educators, that children don't have the language. They don't have the cognitive process to say, I am so fearful. My body's telling you, but I don't have the words for it. And so we have to understand that racism, children feel it because they feel it in their families, they feel it in their community. Here I am, middle class, educated, got a whole degree, got everything, right? But the fear that I have for myself, my husband, my 4-year-old son before he was born, I feel it every day. And so if we don't recognize that feeds into children, then I think that we as adults have a lot of work to do. So that means that we have to really understand the root causes. We can't just focus on what is a child, are they eating today? Are they eating tomorrow? Do they have housing? Those are important, but we have to begin to address the root causes of disparities. And again, that's why I go back to the history, right? We have to recognize what are the policies that we have about housing, about labor, right? Who's an early child educator? Oh, if you're in school, you're an educator. If you're in child care based program, you're kind of, but not really. You don't get the benefits. You are an essential workforce who may not get your meds or get your vaccine until I say that you're an educator or I think that you're important enough, right? So these so we have to begin to really uncover the root causes of it. And a lot of it is our own cultural values, right? Like, let me just take the early childhood for a second. And those are policies about labor, right? That says, hey, if you have a degree in a particular space, if you have met the credentials of being a teacher, you get to work in this field. And you get to make at least $30 to $40 an hour. You get benefits. You're able to stay at home when COVID hits. You know, you are safe and secure. And you are probably in line for the vaccine. Now, if you are a childcare provider, as we call it, or education provider who's in a community-based program, then you are just a worker. And you may not probably don't have benefits. You definitely make probably like $12 to $13 an hour at the high end of it. And you're considered more of a provider. You're not considered an educator. Even if we call you that, you are still valued as as a provider, because we didn't give you access to vaccines. We don't pay you enough. You don't have benefits. If you don't open, you don't get money, right? So this is the problem with our quote unquote early kin education system. And we know most of the Black people, at least in Dayton, but at least across the country, are really, a lot of them are Black women. And now we see obviously a growing number of Latino women in different parts of the country. So again, we continue to say, we continue to show racism in our policies. And if we don't address the policy part, then all we're doing is kind of putting bandages on everything. Like, we'll give you a bonus of $500. We'll give you some resources here, but you never get access to the benefits of a school teacher, or the money, or even the safety of a vaccine. These are the things that we have to continue to uncover, because they exist and they have been with us for a long time. So what policies do I believe should guide our work? Like, what are the principles that, if you guys said, I want to do anti-racism, action work, right, in early kin education, what principles should guide our work, right? So here's what I'm going to sort of propose to you. And I want you all to kind of lean in and sort of think about it. And this is work based on a Kellogg-funded project that did years ago focused on promoting academic success for boys of color. And it's also coming from the literature, particularly around, Black scholars who've been doing this work for a long time, from Howard Stevenson at UPenn to colleagues that I collaborate with here at UNC. And our thought is that there are certain things that we can do, whether you're an educator in the classroom, whether you're an education leader, whether you're an early kin education provider, owner, whether you're a superintendent, whether you're an administrator, whatever your role is, that we believe that these are the active ingredients that protect children, that promote children, and that reify the brilliance of children, particularly minoritized children. And I use the word minoritized because children, even like Black children in certain spaces, are the majority. But who they are, what they bring, their wealth and assets are made invisible. So you are minoritized, even though you're the numeric majority, who you are, what you bring is still made invisible. That's why we use the word minoritized on purpose. And so if we recognize that children of color, Black children specifically, are having to deal with violence, a lack of safety, many, before the pandemic, let's be honest about that, right? Even in Dayton, Montgomery County, right? We know that they're experiencing low quality education, which is clearly why, Learn to Earn Dayton is there, right? They also have a fragile identity because you're being told that you're less than, right? That is the message that every single child, particularly Black child, gets about who you are. Whether they mean to get it or not, they get it, which is why my work is hard, because I have to say, hey, Aries and Alani, you all are brilliant, you're smart, you're gifted, you're beautiful, you're kind. Like, I have to say these affirming words to my children on a consistent basis so that I can combat their daily sort of exposure to traumatic language, right? Other risk factors that they like to experience, loss and trauma. COVID-19 showed us that a lot of children of color, Black children, Latino children, are going to experience a level of loss and trauma, whether from hospitalization or whether from deaths, right? It was COVID-19, but before that, it was violence, it was health conditions, it was so many other social risk factors. And then, of course, harsh discipline that are inconsistent and ineffective. So based on the work of many people, we feel like these are the ingredients that each of us can activate in our own way, in our own special and unique way. The first is protection, right? Protection is intentional sheltering of children from threats to their physical, emotional, and cultural identities, right? This is what we have. This is our role as adults, is minimally, whether you're a policymaker, a superintendent, a teacher, whatever your role is, our job is to protect children from all these kind of psychological threats, right? We have to provide that kind of setting. And we also need to make sure that we're protecting them from the trauma of whether it's economic instability like poverty, or even things like racism and bias and expulsion, right? And we know that there's an association between trauma, poverty, on children's development and their brain development. We know this, right? And we have to remember that we are part of building brains. And if we're not doing that, then what are we doing? So our job has to be to protect, to be a village that's protecting children and their families from these psychological harms and even physical harms in some instances. The second one is about affection. This is really important, right? Affection is really the intentional affirmation, care, and nurtures of a child's physical, social, emotional, and cultural identity. Let me underline the cultural identity part, because we tend to say, well, we love all children. But do you ever think about what is the cultural identity of a Black child? What does that mean? Right? I think we talk about, Latino children in some instances and maybe Asian children, right? But do we talk about the cultural identity of a Black child, of an Indigenous child? What does that mean to have a Black identity as a Black child, right? And the goal of affection is to affirm that children are valued and are important. That is something we have to recognize. Are we telling the children who are in our space that I value you, you are important, and I show it in a way that is developmentally appropriate and consistent with their lives and who they are, right? A lot of the research we know, whether we're talking about parents, early educators, even just us as adults, that we know that affection and sensitive interactions are so critical to children just feeling safe. And this is something that we have to continue to push on, is how do we continue to measure this, but how do we promote it in our classroom, especially during this time when children are really feeling a sense of loss and a sense of my world has changed and I just don't know how to talk about it, right? And the second part is about expectation. A lot of times, as a country, we are one to have low expectations of certain groups of kids, one. The second is that we're actually also likely to be punitive rather than showing children that, you know what, I know you make a mistake and it's okay because we're human, we make a mistake. But oftentimes we use our prison system to overly correct and really to punish. We're not using it to create humanity. We're not using it to rehabilitate. It's not about reconciliation. It's about punishing, but there's no evidence that our use of punishment works. And we do that with young children. We punish, but are we showing them who you are? Are we showing them the best way to express themselves, to be themselves? This is important that we hold high expectation. We will also correct children in a way that is affirming and that is human. And it's about connecting children to their best selves, right? This is the purpose of any kind of punishment, is that we hold high expectation of children, their behavior, and we provide the context and environment. And then finally, I can't, say this enough, is that connection is really critical. That everybody, and this to me, COVID-19 has shown us that we know that in the end of it, human connection is really how we breathe, it's how we live, it's how we have joy, right? So I'm pleased to be able to be with you virtually, but knowing that probably it would have been a different experience when we were together, but still, we at least have the opportunity to come together, even in a virtual form. And we have to recognize that connection is such an important part. How do we make sure that children feel that they belong in the classroom? The sense of belongingness, right, is that I could be there, but I'm still feeling alone. I'm still feeling like I'm not valued. I'm still feeling like my words don't matter. And I've seen in so many classrooms where a lot of children of color, especially Black children, Black girls included, Black boys, where you can see their brilliance happening at the table or in the waterworks or in the play area. And they're looking at their adult to tell them, hey, that is great. Let's talk about what you just created or what you're just doing. So to acknowledge who they are and their uniqueness, and they're part of this culture of the classroom. We have to learn, how do we do that? How do we ensure that that is happening? So I'm challenging every single one of us to think about, what can I do on a day-to-day basis to ensure that children feel protected, that they're feeling affection, that we're having and holding high expectation, but we're also making them feel like they are unique, but they are connected to a larger, not just a larger environment in the classroom, but a larger village that affirms them, that holds them dear, and that will always do the best that we can to give them the best opportunity. That is what equity is. That is what racial equity is. What do I do to dismantle the system to make sure that you are provided with the best opportunity to thrive? So how do we get there? Like, what is it that I'm going to ask you to do, or how can you sort of work your journey to do that? So I sort of pushed on this framework that I call the richer framework. And I call it that because, our country, our village, our world, your community it will be enriched by limited, if not just eliminating, the dehumanization of people, and really the eradication of racism and bias in all aspects of our world, our community, our village, including how we program, the policies that we push or don't push, the research that we do or how we do it. And so for me, we must be richer in our approach. That means that we actually have to do some work as adults, as leaders, that we have to do some work. So it's about re-educating about history. It's about integrating rather than desegregating, right? Because we focus a lot about policies of desegregation, but we know that actually never worked. And we know now with all not all the desegregation orders are over, people back to segregation. That's what they wanted anyways. We have to critique everything, but we also have to come with a level of humility of the privilege that each one of us bring in some form or another, right? The fact that I speak English, that's a privilege. The fact that I'm a US citizen, I don't think about that. That's a privilege, right? There's certain privilege that we bring, and how do we make sure that we show a level of humility when we're working with our young children and our families and our community members? And then how do we push on the goal of erasing racism? Not like, let's do racism light, but how do we accelerate that and push it away from the way that we function as humans? And then how do we envision new ways, new approaches, new theories, new teams, right? We have to be able to see the possibility. If you can't imagine it, then you probably can't do it. So we have to think about that. So that's the richer framework. And I'll just talk a little bit in detail about it. So re-educate about racism, but really it's about re-educating ourselves about American history that is true, right? This is why I would say go to African American History Museum. There's so many that, really go read the real textbooks. There's a lot of authors that have written about the history of the US. And that means that we have to, if we don't know the history, then we were on the edges of repeating it. And so we have to go on a journey of, to me, a lot of times it's actually go unlearn some really bad truths that we thought was truth. So we have to unlearn and relearn. So I say go on a journey of re-education and self-inquiry. Look, you don't even have to read it. You can now watch it on every single YouTube. You can watch it on your Netflix, and your Hulu, all the things. Like now they're available, right? You can hear about it on Twitter if you have Twitter, Facebook groups, all that. There's a lot of opportunities to really be part of the self-inquiry. And we have to engage, and you can do this, as I said, in many, many ways, right? And you have to live and interact with this sense of discomfort, right? Especially if you're a white person, right? A lot of times talk about the importance of dismantling white supremacy, right? And you think it's about you as a white person. Well, we have to actually think about that everything white, it has been the part and the fabric of the US as we see it, the policies, the program, education, yeah, right? A lot of it was created by white people. And so people of color, Black people did not have a role in creating a lot of the things that we see today. So we actually have to go back and in many ways deconstruct it, right? And interrogate it, right? But that we have to do that, we have to go back and look at the history and move forward. Without that, we're just basically just like fish in water, just flopping on the surface. We cannot do that. Second thing is we have to critique everything that we know and everything that we do. Like for me, quite even for you, I want you to question what I'm telling you. If you're like, Iheoma, I need citations, I'll get your citation, right? So we have to question everything from how did you become part of this organization, the job you got as a director, as a superintendent, as the mayor, right? Like, how did you get there? Did you feel you got there out of your free will bootstrap method? Think about that, right? So think critically about both who's in your workplace, who's in your community, how your community is set up, because I can imagine if Dayton is like any other city in the US of America, there's a level of segregation. This is the fact of America. And because we wanted segregation, we have it in every single place in America. Examine your work, your underlying frame with regards to power and resources. Who's at the leadership table? Who is not at the leadership table? Who do you talk with? Who gets to advise on your policies? Who's on your board? Who is a power broker and who are the gatekeepers? They could look like me or not, right? So we have to begin to engage in critical discourse, and we have to do it with a multiracial network. We cannot sort of say, I'm woke and even I'm white, but our leadership is still pretty white. Our research teams are pretty white. Our programmatic leadership is still white. That is not possible. If you're going to work with Black children, if you're going to work with brown children, we have to, in essence, I use the word decolonize. Who gets to be the leaders, who gets to be the voice, right? The second part is that we have to have humility. I don't want somebody to come tell my child about their race their gender, their culture, if you don't even haven't questioned anything, right? So we have to have humility that we all don't have the answers. I don't have all the answers, right? So I go to my Latin friends and experts and colleagues. I go to other people. Even as a Black woman, my experience is different than as a Black man, right? We have to begin to have humility in the work that we do and how we do it. Look, many leaders, white, Black, brown, Latin, Asian, like every leader is brilliant. That's why you're a leader and you have good intentions. But intentions, good intentions or not, is not what we need. We need people who understand that part of the job of equity and racial equity specifically is that you have to understand what you're trying to dismantle and the opportunity you're trying to create for those who have never had it, right? We have to be clear about how our privilege has been weaponized. As a researcher, I understand how research has been used to weaponize and used against people, against communities, against those who did not have. And this is a hard thing for us to understand, is that we may have good intentions, but your good intention doesn't mean anything if you don't understand the weapon being used, if you don't understand the history, if you don't understand the policies that continue to reify and maintain systems, right? You can, early childhood is important, but let's not forget that a lot of us have been doing early childhood and the numbers have not moved. We don't have an increase in wealth generation. We have Black and Latino people have 5 to 7% less wealth than white people. This is after how many years of both education, 50 years. This is after how many years of education. The numbers have not moved, and actually they've continued to go the wrong way, which is we have amassed a lot of power and assets in one community, and we are seeing a loss in another community. And COVID-19 has made that even worse. People who lost jobs, and we had the depression in 2007, where people lost their homes, the value, all. So we need to begin to really show a level of humility and understanding about that this systemic racism is with us every single day. And I said, be okay with critiquing yourself, critiquing me, your current knowledge, and be humbled, but also be empowered that the more you know, the better you would do. And of course, I feel like I don't have to say this. We have to erase racism. That's what we need to do. We have to expand how we do our work, the teams that we work with. We have to show the strength and assets of Black communities, of Latin communities, of other communities of color. We have to embrace it, not just accept it, but we have to embrace that's the only way out of this thing that we're in. You have to begin to question who is not there, right? We have to make racism so visible that people will get sick of hearing it. They'll get sick, like, okay, fine, I'll deal with it, right? We have to do that. And we can only do that by holding ourselves, our community, and those who work with children responsible and accountable, right? This idea that people can just do wrong and say sorry, especially when we're talking about young children, is not acceptable, right? Again, I'm not one to say, oh my God, you did something wrong, that ends it. Is that we have to hold people accountable and say that we expect and demand better, right? This is what we need to do in a very clear way. We want children to be held accountable, adults need to be held accountable.
I say thank you from Learn to Earn for all that you have done and you continue to do. I also want to say thank you to our Learn to Earn Dayton sponsors. We have the Montgomery County Health and Human Services Levy, who has been there since the very beginning of our early learning work in the county, along with the Frank and Tate Foundation. And the Iddings Foundation and the Sperlino Foundation have been faithful supporters for many years now. So we just want to say thank you to them for making this work possible. I also want to take a pause. Normally, when we're together in person, we invite the superintendents to stand or to come and share a few words. Since we can't be together in person, we just want to invite them to say hello in the chat again and introduce themselves so you can see the support we have from our superintendents who could be here with us this morning. So thank you to Shannon Cox with the Montgomery County ESC and to all 16 public school superintendents across Montgomery County. I also know we have many elected officials who are joining us at various times this morning and just want to invite them as well to say hello in the chat so we can get to know them and appreciate them for being here and supporting the work that we do. And I also want to take a moment, since this is our first public event since this happened, and just say thank you to Tom Lasley. Tom Lasley, many of you know, is an exceptional man and an exceptional leader. I've had the privilege of working with him for the last 10 years, and he decided to step down from his role as CEO with Learn to Earn Dayton last year. And he is still with us in a different role, but just want to say thank you to him for his leadership for so many years and for the huge impact he has had on countless children and families and educators in our community. And I also want to welcome Christina Scott, who is our new CEO with Learn to Earn Dayton. She bravely came in the middle of a worldwide pandemic from Alabama to Dayton, and I know she looks forward to meeting all of you in the months ahead. So again, thank you to Christina and to Tom for their support of our early learning work as well.